Okay, good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Lasse Liljedahl and I'm the assistant project manager and lead artist in game developers community called Snowflake Studios. I'm here to tell you the story of Snowflake Studios and something of low budget and online development in general, and also from our point of view. For starters, I would like to briefly introduce Snowflake Studios in general and enlighten our 4 years of history. Snowflake Studios is a game developers community, so it's not a company. All members are working for free, but our goal is to produce as professional products as possible and learn while doing so. The team was founded in January 2003 by our lead programmer and project manager Tapani Valkonen. He decided to make a modification about Finnish wars during World War II. Choosing the modding platform at that time was quite easy. The Battlefield 1942 was released last autumn in 2002, and it was the only game with vast outdoor levels and multiple vehicle platforms, including sea and aircraft. At present day, it's not possible to do a full-scale total conversion modification alone. So Tapani acquired more members from internet forums, Battlefield servers, and internet relay chat commonly known as IRC. When there were enough people gathered from different areas of expertise, the team started the actual work and was named simply Finlandia Mod Dev Team. It requires a lot of patience and long-term commitment to do this kind of online development. So, a lot of people joined to do Finlandia Mod, but left pretty quickly after seeing that it wouldn't be so easy as they thought. While doing online development just as hobby, it's a continuous process while new people come in and old ones leave. And I'm sorry. Okay, but always at some point comes the time when so-called core team takes form and the development starts seriously. This time came for Finlandia Mod team after a few months of planning and learning mod making for Battlefield platform. The modification's name was changed from Finlandia Mod to FinWars, and at that time there were approximately 10 eager people working with it. After months of hard work, the first public version of FinWars was released in February 2004. The modification itself was filled with bugs, and there weren't much to play. But the first big goal was achieved, and the development team got even more committed to the work. One thing that is very important for online development teams like ours at that time is to get public results relatively soon. Because always when you show something new for the gamers, you get a feedback. And even if it's a negative feedback, it shows the development team that someone is waiting and watching the work you're doing. And that gives a great motivation boost for every developer to see that you're not doing your work only for yourself, but that there are people that are eager to get the hands on the game under development. It was also the crucial thing for us, because after the first release, FinWars' development started seriously. And it was also, after that, much easier to recruit more people to the team. Our team has not changed too much from those days. Of course, there have been a number of people who have joined later, but they didn't have the patience or commitment to do this kind of development in long term. So, our members are mainly the same who was already together in January 2004. Currently, Snowflake consists of 14 members, and we all have many years of experience in game and modification development. It's also important to have all areas of expertise covered, because if even one crucial area is not done properly, it's a great chance that the whole project fails. One of the most important things in online development is fluent communication between developers. You can communicate in many ways, But if you're doing as large projects as modifications or games are, okay, and you have several team members, then it's very important to have a real-time communication method. That's because if communication isn't real-time, things just easily get slow and complicated. And teamwork disappears when everyone does as they think is good without getting a second opinion. Then what options there are when a starting team chooses a communication method? Email is too slow and limited for team projects. Forums are easy to use for all members and all information stays in internet. So anyone can check the old information later. But forums are not a good option if it's the only way of communication, because in that case, forums might prove to be too slow. Instant message programs like ICQ and Messenger are more real-time and works when working in small teams. But with larger teams, these might be too slow and complicated to use. But the positive side with these are that, for example, Messenger and ICQ are very popular and vastly used, and also file sending property is available. In the beginning, we in Snowflake made a decision that our primary communication program would be IRC. It's not our only method of communication, but great majority of our discussions occurred in IRC. Then what makes IRC so much better choice compared to others? Real-time communication, private discussion ability, lots of users worldwide, easy to use, and meeting place stays always the same when developers are having their own private dev channel. In the world of broadband connections, is also a couple of methods which are not very popular, but prove to be very effective tools of communication in some occasions. When gadgets like webcams and headsets have become very popular among internet users, it's not a very big step to start using them as part of communication. We Snowflake don't have experience of using webcam as part of our development, but voice chat softwares have been widely used during our previous project with positive experiences. It's much easier to explain things with speech, but it requires a lot of discipline if there are a lot of people using the same channel. Then what is communication in practice in online development? In Snowflake, the most of our team's communication is so-called unplanned communication. While we do our own tasks with our computers, we are always at the same time in our own private channel. So whenever someone has something to say, you are there to discuss about it. Our way is quite non-formal, but the discussion of the development itself comes mostly within conversation. And it has worked very well the last 4 years. In online development, it's important that the general planning concerning the project is made with the whole team, or at least with the key members of the team. Then the decisions made is clear for everyone, and team's morale of team project preserves. Of course, all plans need to be saved for further use. Everyone should make their own notes, but everything should also be available at some place where anyone can check the old information later. And we have used Track for this purpose, and we think that it's one of the best solutions available. It's an open source solution for all project management needs, containing Wiki as a general planning notebook, which is one of the best solutions for that. Nice bug tracking interface speeds up the bug hunting, and SVN managed timeline gives a nice overall picture of job that has been finished. Project management in online development is one thing not to be taken too lightly. If there isn't some rules and persons that controls what others are doing, the project won't advance as efficiently as it could. Another project management method which we used with our previous project, is dot project. It contains good properties for assigning tasks and keeping calendar and records straight. But it's not as easy to use as track is. It contains also same properties as track, but is much clumsier and slower to use. So how's planning and management works in practice? I sort out our way of doing planning and management in two categories, planned and unplanned. With planned, I mean pre-arranged sessions when all members should be present at the same time. Commonly at those times, we make decisions concerning the game under development which have a crucial effect on it, or which concerns the whole team. It depends a lot from the team, but we haven't had a need to keep this kind of planned sessions very often. But if you're working in a team which custom is not to idle so much in your communication channel, then this kind of planned sessions is recommendable in greater numbers. Our way of planning and project management has been pretty much the same as have been our way of doing communication. Our members are active enough, so all planning and work sharing could have been done almost at any time. Modern day software development projects, such as games and game modifications, usually contains large amounts of data. So file storage and delivery may cause a problem. And what kind of softwares and means are needed to survive even from tens of gigabytes of data, delivered and shared by multiple team members from one to another? For starters, every development project has their own media-related files. And for example, when developing computer games, most of the space is needed by textures, audio files, and scene data. Besides everyone's personal computer, this kind of files is good to be backed up and shared to other team members. And our best solution for this problem was to upload all files to development team's personal FTP server. FTP server works for data storage and backupping, as well as delivering files between developers when they are not at the present same time. We in Snowflake used FTP server for this purpose from the beginning, and it's been an irreplaceable tool. Graphics, audio, and music are not the only thing that needs a storage space. Also, programmers need a place where to save their source code. And for their purpose serves software called Subversion, or in short, SVN. SVN is a version control server software which keeps track of all changes made for files in the repository. This makes it easy for programmers to merge their own code changes to other developers' progress. It also makes it possible to take steps back to see what has been modified, when and who has done it. Version control is almost a mandatory for all kinds of development. It organizes programmers' work and keeps them posted in a better way than any other solution would. Commonly, when doing online development only as a hobby, and also when you're just starting in the business, you don't have a lot of money to use for expensive programs. We made a lot of research concerning alternative programs for those which are commonly used in game development business, and which are also very expensive to buy. Besides the softwares mentioned before, there are many good choices what comes to making graphics, sound effects, and music. 3D Studio Max, Lightwave, and Maya are the most used modeling and animating softwares, but they are all very expensive. There are a few programs which are a good choice for those expensive professional softwares. Blender 3D, Gmax, 3D Canvas and Animator are all free softwares, but for example, Gmax can't be used for commercial purpose without paying license fees. Also from 3D Canvas, there are a couple of commercial versions available, but Animator and Blender 3D are completely free. These all can do everything you need to do for modeling and animating, but there are of course differences between the programs. From 3D Canvas and Animator, we don't have much of experience, but during our previous project, we used Gmax, and for mod development, it was at the time the best solution to use. Though, Gmax may be a little complicated for the beginners, but it's quite easy to learn from the tutorials. The last 1.5 years, we have used Blender 3D, and it's simply the best program to use for 3D graphic and animating. It may have a steep learning curve, but because the mouse is not used like in other modeling packages. But the main controlling method in Blender is the hotkeys. And after learning the hotkeys, it's a very efficient program to use. It's also easily scriptable with Python, so the developers can do their own tools for it. What's even better, it's totally open source. What about graphic editors? There's always the famous Photoshop, but big price tag on it. It's not really an option for a low-budget development. But there is always other options. A couple of relatively cheap alternatives worth considering are Painter Pro and Photoshop Elements. They are not as comprehensive as Photoshop, but both include enough features so that needs of the game developers are fulfilled. They are also easier to learn for the beginners, but still good tools for more experienced users. But then there is always the free and open source alternatives. GIMP and Py.NET are two completely free graphic editors. These may not be so easy to learn and handle as commercial softwares might be. But with a little studying, these are very good choices to consider. From these two, GIMP is generally better equipped than Py.NET. Especially Py.NET's painting abilities and its stability is its weak link. But it depends a lot from the users which one he or she likes. In Snowflake, we have used both GIMP and Painter Pro, and both have proven to be good enough for basic game graphic creation. For sound editing, our sound editor has his own studio, so the tools are pretty professional. But there are many low-budget programs or even open source alternatives, so no one has to start building his own studio. Also, music can be made with low budget, and there are a lot of people in internet who can do it. So it won't be a problem to get a musician. But the more professional result you want, the more money you must be willing to sacrifice for the cause. Our choice for music making was a program called Reason and a couple of sample packs for it. People are usually thinking that they must use the same programs as the big game studios to get a good result. The truth is that with cheap or even with free softwares, you can get as good or even better outcome as you would get with the professional tools. Programs won't do the job for you. You do the job with the programs. Next, I'm about to tell you something of independent game and modification development through our experiences and from our point of view. I will use our previous project, FinWars, as comparison because I think that the story of FinWars is a pretty good example of a starting game development team. So why another World War II modification? In the beginning, every modification or game requires a basic idea what it's going to be, look, hear, and even feel when it's ready. Idea should be original enough, so that it wouldn't be just another product from the same subject as dozens of other games. Our idea at the time was to make a modification about Finnish wars during World War II. Before that, there wasn't any other modification or game that reached Finland's involvement to Second World War in such a scale. Another great factor was that all members was very interested from the subject itself. So it wasn't one developer's dream, but the dream of the whole team. That's a very important thing because commonly this kind of online projects fail when the whole team is making game from one man's vision. And that leads easily to a point when people are leaving the team and no one has the eagerness to continue. In the beginning, it's important that the game's design from certain areas is quite clear. Then you have a starting point and a rough roadmap for what needs to be done. For the first, you will have to make your own choices about game's theme, whether it's sci-fi, history, or present day, and will it be a first-person shooter or other game type. Our decision was Finnish Front on World War II with a semi-realistic first-person action. Without this decision, there isn't much you can do. Remember to also keep in mind that at the beginning you shouldn't start with the next Half-Life 2, but better projects. Instead, keep everything simple and straightforward. When you achieve one small goal, you can set up a bigger one to achieve next. Our way was that the first version should include infantry warfare and a few playable maps. It wasn't a big goal, but it took almost a year to achieve even that. After that, we always set a bigger goals to achieve next. Next came vehicles, then graphic enhancements, map packs, and finally air forces. Don't let the dreams to take control. Keep your sense of reality intact. Graphics don't make a game alone, but it's one of the most important things which players look. It's also the only thing that players see before they can play the game itself. Before nothing is made, it's important to make a choice about game's visual look, whether it's realistic or something else. That's because all graphics in the game should look pretty much the same. It also depends a lot from the game's subject which option to choose. Our choice was clear. We decided to make as photorealistic as possible, with that skill we possessed at the time and also within Battlefield 1942 engine's limitations. Working with graphics requires a lot of research, especially with the games which has a counterpart or a history in the real world. For example, we use dozens of books, blueprints, documentary movies, and thousands of pictures as reference material for Fin Wars. Generally, pictures are not enough, but you should also read the stories behind the pictures, people, vehicles, weapons, and etc. They give you more insight, which is only a good thing while doing as authentic game as possible. Sound and music are commonly greatly underestimated section of the game. Developers too often keep them the necessary evil. But the truth is that audio is almost as important as graphics. Music needs to fit the game itself, and it requires lots of planning. What kind of music would be appropriate for the game under development? Also, the use of music in the game is a very big question, because it's important to use in right places and at right time. Style of music is greatly dependent on game's theme, but music is probably the area where a musician has the greatest liberty compared to other artists. Music for Fin Wars was quite clear. The theme was serious, and only suitable music we even considered was military marches from World War II and other music played commonly at that time. Sounds also play a big role in games, and now when more and more people are having 5.1 surround systems and 3D headphones connected to their computers, it's become even a remarkable area than before. Many games are criticized because of bad sound effects. So when planning and doing sound effects, don't content to easiest and fastest solution. Instead, try to make them so authentic as possible. Or if there isn't a counterpart in the real world, try to make them so plausible as if they were real. Gameplay is one thing that can destroy the whole game all by itself. If graphics and sounds are in order, but gameplay doesn't please the player, it can ruin the whole game. So, it's very important to weigh the possibilities which you have and which is reasonable to carry out. If your goal is to make as realistic gameplay as possible, then remember that you still have to make sacrifices that the gameplay won't turn into slow and sluggish crawling. On the other hand, if you advertise your game as a simulation, that's even harder to make a game real enough for those hardcore players that are waiting the ultimate simulation of the subject. When doing modifications, the gameplay is usually the same as it is in the original game. Sometimes it's even possible to expand the possibilities of the original game. But rarely it can change to something else. And if it can, it requires a lot of work to do that. That's a reason why we decided to make Finvoice's gameplay semi-realistic. For example, tank steering was possible to make more realistic by doing both tracks separately controllable. But, for example, infantry movement is mostly the heritage of Battlefield 1942. Fluent and easy controls are probably the biggest individual issue to achieve a good gameplay. If they are not in order, the fun of the playing game vanishes. Before starting a production of game levels, you must make a profound plan from each level. Without a good plan, levels are very hard to make purely from intuition. There's no such plan that would be the same in the end, but at least it gives a good starting point. Levels can't be made without tons of textures and 3D models. So a good plan gives a basic list of required objects and textures, so that modelers and artists can start their work in time. There are a few things that are required for a good plan. Basic layout of the map, object list, mission objectives, and written version what happens in a map during game. For Finvoice, we made maps based on real environments and maps which have a real name, but the map itself doesn't represent any event or a place. With those maps, which are based on real battlefields, we made a lot of research, and I even visited some of the locations and took photographs of the environment. When trying to do something authentic, you never can be accurate enough, but that's what can be taken into a game is a different issue. Compromises must be made because the real thing is not always suitable for the game. When you have a rough idea of what you are about to do, it's time to start the actual production. Every game and modification requires a vast library of models and textures. Those are one of the most work-requiring areas. For a starting team, it's not so simple to start making models in a very effective way. And usually, after some time has passed, older models and textures are starting to look pretty awful. The main point still is to produce much models in relatively short time. Usually, the same person who makes the model also makes texturing, but that's not the only way. In the beginning of Finvoice, we used assembly line method, because that was at the time fastest way of doing things. We had people who could make models, but not textures, and vice versa. It was a good choice at the time, but for a more experienced team, it might not feel comfortable. Textures can be made of nothing with graphic editors in the hands of skilled texture artists. But commonly, game artists use digital cameras to get raw pictures from different surfaces and use them as a starting point to create the textures for the game itself. Almost everyone has a digital camera, so it's not a big deal to go out and take pictures. But before going, you should repeat the basic rules of photographing. Map making is much more teamwork than other areas of development. Map makers need to do lots of planning and cooperation with modelers and texture artists. Everything they do must also be tested very thoroughly. It's not out of ordinary that as thorough the testing is, it's not enough. After release comes a lot of issues that needs to be fixed, not only in graphics or maps, but almost any other area. For example, almost 90% of Finvoice was redone after third release public version. And after that, there have been 5 new major releases and one map expansion. Making models for a standalone game or modification varies a little. When you're making modification, you can start doing models and maps almost immediately, and see results relatively soon. Instead, while you're doing a standalone game, you need a game engine or some kind of model viewer powered by your game's graphic engine to see the models like they are in-game. That takes some time and might be a frustration for modelers just to do simple models or map makers just to do planning and research. Sounds and music are the section of the game or modification that are not so much dependent on other areas of development. And usually they are added in-game the later part of development. Still, the amount of work that sounds require is large. There can be thousands of different sound effects and speeches, but only one audio editor. Usually they use a couple of different methods combined in sound effect creation. They can use sound samples and edit them suitable for the game, or they can record their own sounds. For Finvoice, we use both methods, and our sound editor edited them in his own studio. And even Finvoice is just a modification. Almost all original sounds were replaced. In modifications where you use game's original sounds combined with your own, the sound quality can't suffer, so that even your own sounds don't hear bad by the side of the original ones. One of the most time-taking part is testing. You never can test enough, so as soon as you have something to test, do it and do it properly. Don't content to superficial looking. With first 3 versions of Finvoice, we tested only within development team, and there weren't many testers, and the testing was quite non-organized. Result was release version filled with bugs. After that, we recruited a testing team, which main task was to test everything that would end up in the game. After a couple of years of experience, I can say that it was a right choice to make. We never would have achieved to do as vast modification as Finvoice is now, without fully organized testing team who's cooperating with the actual development team. Testers don't just run through maps, but test everything. For example, it might feel pretty boring just to shoot vehicles with different weapons from different distances from hour to another. But that's very important work to do, so that all imbalances can be corrected in time. Still, testers' work is not always boring. When release is closing, everything must be tested as it would be a real game situation. And that's done best by playing the game hours straight. Programming in standalone games and scripting in modifications are the most meticulous and the most laborious work to do. It's also the work where all begins and where it also mainly ends. One of the biggest reasons when an online project fails is that team is short of programmers. And even if you have a programmer, it's hard to get other skillful programmers to get interested of your project, because generally all of them are already working with their own projects. To get their interest, you must show something concrete to demonstrate that you're regarding seriously to the task. The actual production from programmer's view is just hard work and learning new things and testing. That was all I'm going to say about game development itself, but next, a short introduction what we in Snowflake Studios are about to do. Finvoice Final was released last summer, and after that, our goal was to move on and start doing our own standalone games. It's a pretty bold decision for a modification team to start doing standalone games, because it always requires a lot more from the developers. So why make that choice and risk it all by doing so? It was a united decision, because we had been together with the same team approximately 4 years. And some of us worked together even before Finvoice. We knew that we might have a potential to do standalone games because there were skillful people from all needed areas of expertise. It wouldn't be easy, but that's the thing what makes this so much fun. After some thinking, our decision was to make a game that would be a multiplayer first-person shooter, fun to play, but easy enough to do as our first standalone project. The name of the game is the Battlegrounds of the West. Including the unusual theme in our game, there are lots of other things we want to experiment, especially those which have never been seen in any game before. For example, our game won't have any actual game modes, but objective-based missions that vary from level to level. Standalone game always requires its own game engine, and we have been developing one for that purpose, and we call it Mammoth. Game also needs editing tools to make the workflow as smooth as possible. So we have also been making our own tools for Mammoth engine, and when ready, they will ease up our development considerably. It also gives the players a chance to create their own content for the game. Considering the subject, this was only a scratch from the surface, but I hope that you learned something new here. There's still a little time for a few questions, so please ask if there's something you want to know. Questions, please. Please.
What was the funniest bug you ever found during the first three initial internal releases?
What was the funniest bug we found? There were so lots of those funny bugs that I can't name one example, but for example, skis were pretty funny when they speeded up hundreds of miles per hour, and when, of course, there were vehicles bouncing over the water and boats flying in the air and textures turning into Christmas trees and something like that. Any other? Yeah. Excuse me.
What kind of objectives will the maps in the Battlegrounds West contain?
What kind of objects and maps?
Objects in the maps. What kind of them? Are they destroying something or?
Oh. Well, the Battlegrounds of the West is multiplayer first-person action game. So there can't be lots of physics in the game itself because the current networks can't stand too much physical objects. So there are some interactivity and physics in the game itself, but it can't be so vast as for example, buildings can't be destroyed.
Actually, what kind of objects will be there?
For example, furniture, weapons, all smaller objects are interactive.
How about the actual objectives on the map? Like the ones, how do you win? I mean.
Objectives. You meant objectives.
Yes.
There are not exact game modes in Battlegrounds of the West, but there haven't made any decisions yet which will be final, but we have looked lots of Wild West movies, so I think that there will be much of cliché objectives.
And they are not like kill everybody you see.
No, not everybody. No killing everyone, but I can't reveal too much at this point. But there are lots of other things than killing in the game itself. Any more?
Yeah, so what's the schedule for your Battlegrounds West? Releasing it sooner or later? Or?
There's not exact schedule yet, but for now we have said that it will be released at some point in 2007, but it might turn it to be 2008 also, so nothing promises made. Any more questions? So, no more questions. And my time's up here, but if you want to know more, you can come to Snowflake Studios' booth at this level, approximately 40 meters that way. Thank you for participating in this seminar, and have a good time in Assembly 2006.